All right, so we're going to do a video on brushes, creating brushes and talking more about the settings here that we have so you can get a sense of it, but also um, the brush window here as well, and we're going to work a little bit more with this so you can see what's going on here and the differences between brush settings and brushes. And so last class we talked about using the spacing, and we talked about shape dynamics, and we were using angle jitter to help us with our shapes. But I want to talk about, before I get into that, I just want to show you quickly with this website. I just typed in WacombTablet into my web browser, and it's going to show you pretty quickly some purchasing items. So this is Best Buy. It's a real simple tablet, pretty good price, and so maybe you might be interested in buying one. If you're into painting, I would highly recommend that you at least get something similar to this. Um, the more expensive ones are going to have a larger space to paint on, which is kind of cool. And then they'll also probably have a more sensitive pen and more settings that you can take advantage of that are kind of cool. And probably the side of the thing is going to have some buttons that you can use, which is kind of cool as well. But those are all just fancier. And you really could get away with just something along this price range if you're interested. And you can check these out at school. If you're at school at DVC, you can come up to the ATC building between the room ATC 110 and 107, or 108, excuse me. And there's a place to check these out, and there's hours there, and it's open fairly often, and you can check one out there. Also, if you're in the art building in A303, we actually set up a whole lab of these things. These are called Cintiqs, and if you're not familiar with it, you could just look it up and take a look. This is really unique, and we're really excited to have these for all the drawing classes. And ideally, this class, if it's face-to-face, we would be using these a lot, and working with them. With Photoshop in particular, really takes advantage of this sort of thing. And it allows you to paint directly onto the screen digitally. It's pretty awesome. It's probably as close to digital, like, drawing, like, I mean, traditional drawing as you could get, because it's a one-to-one relationship, where these ones can be a little bit awkward to work with. So I would recommend you test one out if you can before you purchase one, because you might find yourself like, "Oh, I really don't like that." But if you do try it out, it's not going to work in one day. You got to kind of practice like at least a week with these to get used to them. It takes time to get used to them. I still personally am not super used to them, because I'm not a real huge painter, so I don't use it all the time. But once I get used to it, I find it a little bit better. But using the Cintiq is completely blowing my mind, just so you know. So let me minimize that. So that's something for you to think about. You don't have to do it now, but you might want to consider it. And I bring it up because a lot of these settings here that you're looking at, they're actually using the pen. And if you don't have a pen, your mouse isn't really going to take advantage of the settings. So I'm going to kind of show that a little bit. So let me turn off, well, I'll leave shape dynamics on. I was kind of testing around here. Let me turn this off, because this is kind of how we came to it. Everything off. Really, this was actually off too, if you remember. I just made a new document, same size, same PPI, 300 PPI. I'm just going to turn these off so you don't see them anymore. And basically, I just have a brush, and if I paint with a brush, I'm using a mouse right now. So I have a mouse set up, and I also have the tablet set up, and you can see just what you expect. Paint comes out. Okay. I actually have, if you notice, I have this whole layer is all selected. It's kind of cool when you're testing brushes, is just make a new layer, and then just grab your marquee selection tool and just do a big old marquee selection over the whole thing, and that way you can test and then delete. It just goes a little bit faster. So you'll notice I'm going to test and delete a lot here. So with my brush selected, again, just you see the brush. Its opacity is well, it's 99. Let's put that back up to 100. And the flow is also 100%. So those are what we expect. Now we remember when we go down flow, we get yeah, that's not enough. Let's bring that all the way down. So remember, the flow, it takes time to build up, and all those things. So all those settings are what we've talked about. But what's different is, let me turn on shape dynamics now, and we did do the angle jitter, so you guys are familiar with that. But let's talk about this one right here, and this is size control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to pen pressure. And you'll notice that you get this minimum diameter on the bottom here, and this is controlling the minimum diameter of the pen pressure. Let me zoom out so you can see what I'm talking about. And you see in the dialog box that, or this little box here that's showing you the shape of the brush. And I think I didn't talk about this last class, but notice this is really cool because it helps us understand what the brush is doing before we actually use it. So if I paint with my mouse, you can see that it's just the same. It hasn't changed. I have that. I have my flow. Let's just crank the flow back up. It's just acting exactly the same. I turned on this pen pressure with shape dynamics, and it's acting exactly the same. But let me shift over and use my WacombTablet now, and I'm going to try to do light pressure, although I think it's pretty sensitive. And you see how I can kind of, as I press harder and harder and get a thicker line, and as I go softer and softer, I get a narrower line. It's a little hard to control. Like I said, I'm not the best at it, but you can do these nice soft strokes and get little narrow lines, and if I press harder, I can get thicker lines. And this is something that a lot of the painters you're watching, and these speed painters, they're actually taking advantage of this. They have these pen tools, and so you'll notice that they aren't like changing the size of the brush as much. You'll notice them doing it a little bit, but they're also kind of controlling the size of their brush by how much pressure they're using. See that? So I can get a small brush, and I can get a big brush, right? And so I have a lot more control over how this thing's going to work based on how much pressure I put on the pen. So the pen is pressure sensitive. You also have tilt, and if you look at some of the settings, you can play around with these. These are harder to work with, quite frankly. Stylus wheel, I guess you could set that. I don't actually have a stylus wheel. I wish I did. It'd be fun to play with that. I'm not gonna. You guys can play around with these and see. I think those of you with a mouse, you might actually. Well, let's see. Maybe this. I have a funky mouse right now. Yeah, it's not doing anything. Yeah, I have like a magic mouse. It's a bizarre mouse. I'm not sure what stylus wheel does, but let's not worry about it. Let's go back to pen pressure. So that's what a lot of the tools that I'm going to show are actually going to take advantage of these things. So if you are just using a mouse, you're not going to have the same sort of experience. You're going to really have to change your brush size a lot and just manually do a lot of brush changing, right? Like that. But with the pen, you can actually get away with less brush size changing. There's also this thing called transfer, which we'll talk in a moment about, which allows you to control opacities and flows, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's just leave it at that. So right now, now that you're aware that there's a brush and there's the pen tool, or rather the WacombTablet pen, and then there's also a mouse. So if you're using a mouse, some things are going to be true and some things aren't going to be true. If you're using a WacombTablet, some things are going to be true and some things are not going to be true. So I'm going to kind of shift between the two as we go, and you'll see the differences, and maybe that'll make you want to try one out if you haven't already. Okay, so before we get into more of the settings, let's just actually talk about making a new brush. No, actually, let's talk about the settings. Looking down, I'm just going to click on them. Scattering is kind of a cool. Let's bring our spacing up a little bit. Remember, spacing helps us organize, right? How this looks. And we're always tuning with spacing, right? So scattering, you can hear scatter. I can scatter, and my count's pretty high, so if I bring that down. And so now if I paint, you see I get these extra dots. It's pretty nice. And because I have actually a pen, just notice now I can get little dots and big dots. Little dots, big dots, right? So again, with the brush, with just the mouse, I just get these. With the pen, I get this, right? And if I press harder, I get that. So I get a lot of variance, right, which is really cool. And so especially for nature stuff, this is kind of awesome. So scattering is pretty cool. Of course, you can see that we could set this up to pen pressure as well, right? So, you know, a lot of these can be controlled with the pen, the pressure and stuff. Not even talking about jitters, just talking about these controls. But in this case, right here, I was just doing a scatter up here. Okay, let's turn that off. Remember, it's the check mark turns them off and on, but clicking on the word really shows us the settings, right? So remember that from last class, okay? Another really cool one is transfer, and that is, I have that still set to pen pressure, but notice that we can do an opacity jitter. And you can see that the line gets slightly opacities. So as I click with my mouse, you can see I'm kind of getting, some of these are a little bit darker or lighter depending. Okay. And again, if I use my, let's delete this. If I use my pen from the Wacom tablet, you can see that I can press harder and softer, and that's the result I get. And it's kind of cool. Especially if you add in scattering with that, it can be even cooler. Right, so I'm getting, you know, I'm adding those up, right? It's kind of cool, right? Obviously, the transfer had the flow jitter as well. It's a similar situation, right? So remember, as we go over, we'll get darker and darker. And I think what you're seeing, a lot of the painters are using this as well, right? They're taking advantage of the fact that they have flow going on. But this one might be a little better, having the spacing a little lower. Let's try that. Remember, spacing really is one of our real powerful tools, right? So as I paint over, these will, because I'm using a variable amount of flow, I'm getting that kind of look. Real quick, I just wanted to add in, if you do have one of these tablets, it's really good to go into your settings and your preferences for the Wacom tablet. On an Apple, you know, it's a little bit different. I have an Apple PC, it's gonna be different. But if you can get into the customized settings, I would suggest that you play around with the tip field. Mine was at in the middle, and I was having a hard time with the pressure. If you see it press down, it shows you the pressure, the amount of pressure you're getting. And I actually, for me, I feel like I like it actually at firm. And in fact, actually, you can go to customize too, and it brings up this little dialog box, and you can see, I'm zoomed out. Let me zoom out. You can actually grab this and really even, you know, change that curve so it's really, you can just really increase how sensitive you are. And for me, I find that's actually working really well. And say okay, and close this. And now turn this back to where we were. Yeah, I want to just show you this. So now with my shape dynamics, with pen pressure, just notice I can go really small. And now I can get bigger, but you know, I have to really press hard for the really big now, but I find that it works a little bit better that way. But really what I want to show you also is transfer, because for whatever reason I didn't show using the flow with pen pressure, because that's probably the most important thing, is that they're using the pen pressure to manage the flow. So you notice when a lot of people are painting, they're getting these strokes that are looking like this, and they're suddenly getting a really hard color, and then they're getting soft. And so what you're noticing is most of the painters have their their pen pressure is set to the flow, and that's what's really giving them that extra control. And you can see I'm having a hard time. The sensitivity maybe is not the best, but play around with the sensitivity settings in your preferences as well to get the Wacom to perform the way that it works best for you. Let's go back to it.